Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ravished, a historical romance and movie review podcast. I'm one of your sister hosts, Nick.
And I'm the other host, Sister Donna. Thank you to all our listeners tuning into our last episode of season one. We have had a delightful time throughout our inaugural season and pretty much all our episodes. We thank each and every one of you for spending time to hear our reviews and providing us feedback.
Yes, it was such an exciting adventure for us, and we look forward to season two. So, listeners, this week is our listener's choice. We drew from a hat and out popped. You're not going to guess it. Donna, take it away.
Pride and Prejudice. I was pretty excited. Nick, how'd you feel?
Well, at first, I was enamored with Excite.
Okay, you're really talking like Jane Austen. Okay.
Thank you. As you know, I've never watched the movie, much less read the long ass book. And furthermore, I am aware of the novel being of superb quality for the historical romance genre, and as well as hearing how worthwhile the movie was with women who I was around saying, squinching their faces, saying, "What? You haven't seen the movie?" You know?
One of our loyal listeners, dear to our heart, at Honey Hilda on Instagram, is the woman who recommended it. We are so pleased with this recommendation. Yay!
Yes. So when I remembered who recommended it, I just knew I was going to be liking it. It was going to be a rewarding and satisfying read. Honey Hilda is an ingenious artist at anything she does, from baking to sewing to writing to painting and acting or singing while playing an instrument. I know I kind of sang that, but I mean, she's poetic as well with everything she does. She's a really great person and a really good friend. We love her.
I agree. She is multi-talented. She taught herself how to play the accordion, people. What the hell?
Right?
Uh, but most importantly, her best quality is that she's our cousin.
Yay.
So thank you, Honey Hilda. No, that's not her real name, for taking the time and reaching out and tuning into all of our episodes. We very much appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. But I gotta say, I mean, I was even more absorbed with the desire to watch the movie. So, besides all that, Donna, she permitted me to watch it. So, my perspective is from the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie, and Donna actually read the entire book. So, here's my rough review of the characters from the film, since it's definitely not the same as the actual book. Mr. Bingley likes Jane. Mr. Darcy likes Lizzie slash otherwise known as Elizabeth, I think. Dancing. Mr. Darcy does take an eye to Miss Lizard Teeth. That's not nice. And Bing Bong definitely likes Jane Pretty Face Bennett. Danced with her 2 times. And man, his face and eyes are weird in the movie. He like glows. I mean, I'd date him. Oh boy. Jane is sick at Mr. Bingley's. Weird. Parade nonsense. Having lunch or something with 2 women, Mr. Darcy and Ninja Tongue Knightley, and a redhead who acts like a vixen. Oh, is that Mr. Bingley's sister? What a creepoid. So that was my notes that Donna made me read. Oh gosh. Embarrassing.
Wow, what a sophisticated storyteller you are. I felt like it was
Hey.
a robot talking.
I don't know. I don't know how to read my notes. Goodness gracious. So,
Did you pass high school?
oh my God, I don't know. So, yeah, those were seriously my first notes, and rough draft, chicken scratch. But alrighty, let's get serious. So, Pride and Prejudice was written in 1813 by Jane Austen and takes place in England during the same time period. She actually began a draft of Pride and Prejudice titled First Impressions in 1799, and since being published, it's become her best known story. Pride and Prejudice was surprisingly her second anonymously published novel after Sense and Sensibility was published in 1811 to favorable reviews.
Austen died just 4 years after publishing Pride and Prejudice at the young age of 41.
Gosh, I just can't believe that. I mean, what what happened to her? I do know I read her life was much like this book story. The love of her life was forbidden to marry her due to her class status and financial emptiness, but how
Yeah,
did she die?
interesting.
You know?
I didn't find, or I didn't even try to find what she died from, but I
Me
know there's
neither.
actually a movie with Anne Hathaway, called Becoming Jane, which is supposed to be like Jane Austen's life story about the lost love that kind of mimics this story, Pride and Prejudice. If you want to check that
Interesting.
out because you don't know how to read, but
Well, yeah, and it's my other favorite actress besides Keira Knightley, Anne Hathaway. Yay. I can't wait.
Jane Austen successfully published 4 novels during her lifetime, and her siblings actually had 2 more of her novels published after her passing.
Wow, that's interesting. I excitedly read fun facts about the author as well, and come to find out, she could have possibly adapted the title of Pride and Prejudice from a book written by Fanny Burney named Cecilia. So in the novel Cecilia, they repeat the phrase Pride and Prejudice several times. Also, Austen was an anonymous writer with this book and Sense and Sensibility. So for Sense and Sensibility, she wrote written by a lady. And for this book, she wrote written by author of Sense and Sensibility.
So she
So
liked
she,
using the same letter, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility.
yeah, twos,
Dang.
doubles,
Ooh.
but mainly because she was scared because she was a girl.
Yep.
But it wasn't until her passing that her brother revealed who she really was. And lastly, some tantalizing discoveries about Mrs. Austen and her golden work is that there have been more than 10 film and TV versions of the book. So, from zombies to, of course, our beloved Bridget Jones' Diary. And I found I'm actually super interested in watching the 2012 to 2013 web series called The Lizzie Bennett Diaries. Have you heard of them, Dan?
No, I've never heard of those.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at that. Dear listeners, as I've said many times over this season and many times in my life, this is my favorite period of romance and reading books set in this period, Regency romance. But it's with a twist because this book was actually written during the Regency period. All the books
So
I
cool
usually
for
read,
you.
What?
I'm sorry, so cool for you.
Very different. I mean, the authors I read now who write Regency stories, it's not the same. Uh, our references for this information have been Wikipedia and janeausten.org. And like I was just saying, this book was totally different from the Regency romance novels I typically read because the language and speaking patterns reflect the early 19th century, whereas my typical Regency romance novels, they really modernize the way the characters are speaking. So it's easier to understand. And
Hmm.
honestly, I had to start this book over a couple times because I just couldn't get into it. Because to understand their way of speaking was just, you had to turn your brain on. It wasn't like an escape. I was like studying and, you know,
Hmm.
having to work for it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I can imagine even the audiobook that I rented from my library was difficult to comprehend. With the ancient British dialect of the narrator, and I mean, I was lost real quick, and it would have had taken me many more days to re-listen and become accustomed to such a speedy and twangy accent,
Mm-hmm.
almost like an auctioneer at times. And So, anyway, back to the author, Mrs. Austen. Her premise of Pride and Prejudice has remained relevant to generations of readers and moviegoers for over 2 centuries now. And there are dozens of adaptations to modernize the characters, to include a movie we've previously reviewed in episode 7, Bridget Jones's Diary. Love it.
Woo woo.
All right, now we know a little bit about the author. Let's go ahead and start with an overview of the characters. First, we have the Bennets, the mom, Mrs. Bennet, mommy dearest. She's a jittery little thing, obsessing over getting her young daughters out of the household by meddling every second of every minute.
Seriously, though.
That's
Yes,
true.
Mrs. Bennet actually comes from a lower class than Mr. Bennet. He's like a gentleman. And Mrs. Bennet is, like you said, obsessed in an inappropriate way, especially for the times, the Regency period, with getting her
Mm-hmm.
daughters hitched. And her behavior actually creates some controversy for her daughters because the higher echelons of society look at her with disapproval for how like thirsty she is to get her daughters married, if that makes sense in today's, lingo.
It does. And yes, I've learned from all of your other Regency books you've reviewed that rules and propriety were of the highest importance during this period in England, and life was very strict on what was allowed and what was offensive, pretty much.
Yep. And next we have the dad, Mr. Bennet. He's both aloof and present, an odd gentleman, hard to figure out, and of few words is a good way to put it. Lizzie,
Mm-hmm.
the main character, is a daddy's girl, and she's obviously his favorite. I do believe she's his favorite because she has like a quirky intelligence and kind of a tomboy attitude. The book shows Mr. Bennet as a little less in touch with Lizzie, though, than the movie from my perspective. And he doesn't like his wife very much at all and finds his 3 younger daughters quite ridiculous.
Yeah, that was weird that he felt like that about them. But um, okay, so the oldest of the Bennett girls is Jane. She's known as a beauty of their town and is quite reserved and shy. She definitely seems more of what I envision a proper English lass to be when compared to all of her other sisters.
I 100% agree with that assessment. She's, super mild mannered and never says a mean word against anyone, even though she easily could. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so next is the second oldest daughter and our main female character, Lizzie, also known as Elizabeth Bennet. She's very headstrong and speaks boldly when she feels she or her sisters, especially Jane, who she's closest with, are being treated wrongly. She's a protector of her older sister, like I said, and she cares for her younger sisters, even though they're very careless and constantly getting into some trouble or another.
Yeah, and from the film, I noticed she dresses down and colorless, and she also has a determined tongue, which I'll be honest, I couldn't follow all the word salad conversations too well. I and it reminded me of the Gilmore Girls, you know,
Okay. Yeah,
once
real
again.
witty. Always has something quick to say.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So next we meet the 3 younger Bennett sisters, Lydia, Mary, and Kitty. Lydia and Kitty are extremely boy crazy and have no care whatsoever for propriety, it seems, as long as they get to giggle and get attention from men. Reminds me of some sisters I have. Mary is very unhappy and definitely the oddball out. She's like very weird.
Yeah, I barely even remember her from the movie, like
Yep.
seriously.
Same with the
But
book.
okay. An extension of the Bennets is Mr. Collins, who is to inherit their property when their father dies because he had no sons. He's a minister at a church for a wealthy aristocratic lady who he thinks walks on water, and he's very into the Bible. And whenever people tell him to pretty much chill out, he thinks he knows better and imposes himself on everyone to talk about his proprietress.
Yep.
So he's lame.
Annoying. Next, Mr. Charles Bingley, or as Nick had stated earlier, Bing Bong. Uh, he's from a different societal class than the Bennets, and he's Jane's love interest. He kind of doubts his own decisions that he goes with whatever his friend, Mr. Darcy, tells him as fact. Mr. Bingley is kind and seems to be sensitive and truly head over heels for Jane. He kind of enjoys the Bennet's outrageousness and quirkiness, and he also has two sisters, one of which shows up in the book and the movie, Caroline Bingley. And I mean, of course, she's rude and a redhead. Let's be real.
Wow. Never met one.
So Caroline is determined to win Mr. Darcy over, and she really can't stand the Bennets. She, kind of befriends Jane, but is disingenuous and just an ugly person on the inside from what I saw of her.
Yeah.
She's also determined not to allow Jane and her brother to end up together. She really wants Mr. Darcy's younger sister, who's not even a really big character, and she's like really young, to marry her brother.
Awkward.
Right? Weird.
So stay with us. Only two more characters we felt were worthy of mentioning. One, Mr. Wickham.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of Lizzie's love interests, and he plays the victim to her other love interest, Mr. Darcy. Wickham is handsome as Ken Barbie doll in the movie, but spreads wicked rumors about Mr. Darcy of how he betrayed him because Mr. Darcy's father loved Wickham more than his own son.
Okay.
Lies, lies. Or was it true?
Ooh. Wickham was pretty obnoxious to me. Anyways. And lastly, we have Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. He's our main male character in the book. He's very staid and straight laced. His demeanor comes across as snobbish, but he's really just an observant person looking out for the welfare of those he cares about. And he seems like he wants to do right by people. He comes across very stuffy at first, but then we get to see a whole other side of him towards the end of the book and the movie, which was pretty nice.
Yeah, and it sounds just like Mock Dawsey in Bridget Jones' Diary. In the movie, he was over over the top, like awkward, arrogant, kind of. And when he softened up, like all of a sudden, I was like, well, that happened pretty quick. And but furthermore, speaking of episode 7, Bridget Jones' Diary movie review, Colin Firth is so much a better actor than the guy who played Darcy in the Pride and Prejudice movie. I have
That's
to
his
say
grandpa. No, I'm just
it ain't.
kidding.
It ain't.
Yeah, I mean, the book, I get what you're saying with the movie, how it just rushed to change him into a different person, but the book was definitely drawing out his change over time. So it was way more believable and made him more likable.
Mm.
Um, but at the same time, it was like he randomly just started liking Elizabeth. That was kind of just like, what?
Well, yeah, and in the movie, I mean, I know it was crunched, crammed and stuff, but it's like from the beginning, it seemed like he liked her, he had an eye for her.
Oh, yeah. Well, not in the book.
Well, all right, moving towards the plot. So there was a ball, and who were all the women so ecstatic to meet? The two new men in town, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy and Mr. Charles Bingley. And with word of Darcy making £10,000 a year, quite a catch, I should say, which I researched is actually just under £900,000 a year in today's money. So tell our listeners what conspired at the ball, Donna.
Oh, the ball. The ball was magnificent. With all the women trying to catch the gentleman's gaze, Mr. Bingley, with his adorable attitude, and Mr. Darcy, aka Mr. Oh So Mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked the scene. I thought it was written very well, and Miss Austen can paint a vivid picture. Mr. Bingley had his eyes on the beautiful Barbie doll that is Miss Jane Bennet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as Nick mentioned, he only dances with Jane, and he does it twice.
Oh, yep. So, yep, that sealed the deal right there. That's what I was thinking, at least. You got to read to find out.
So Mr. Darcy spoke sort of highly about only one girl, and it wasn't Lizzie. It was also Jane. Unfortunately, though, Lizzie happened to hear him disparaging her, Lizzie, to Caroline, Bingley's sister.
Mm-hmm.
They essentially stood, Mr. Darcy and Caroline stood on the side of the dance floor and weren't sociable at all. The way he was talking about Lizzie, that's what I'm saying. You wouldn't see
Mm-hmm.
him being interested in her, and like he was just kind of like dissing everybody.
Yeah. Well, throughout the movie, the chemistry between Mr. Darcy and Miss Bennet, it was intense and it was edgy or seat feeling. Something was going to happen between them, leading up to all that. If it was going to happen, I don't know. I can't say that, or they're going to kill each other pretty much. So wasn't quite really sure of that answer, really. So Lizzie seemed to call Mr. Darcy out on a lot of his attitude, though, which was refreshing and a bit annoying.
I mean, I liked it because she wasn't gonna just sit there and let him be a jerk to all the people she's known her whole life or about herself and her family. She called him out for it. Like, who do you think you are? You're in our territory, like you're being very disrespectful.
Yeah, it was just a lot of it. But, well, I'll profess that it is my favorite ravishing love connection of any couple throughout this entire story. I love them.
Yeah, I didn't think they'd really be into each other. That's me. The book goes in way more into depth, of course, and really makes their romance, like I said earlier, more believable. But it's still surprising because he was a big old jerk.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, Mr. Darcy's snobbish attitude does no favors for him in winning Lizzie over to him. And at this point, he really isn't interested in her. I mean, he thinks she's inferior. As we mentioned regarding her younger sisters, they're not entirely acting in accordance with propriety of the times and look foolish to him. So now the movie seems a bit different in that aspect. Every scene him and her and together is apparent he has something for her, more than a superiority complex. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I've seen the movie and the book, so I understand and read the book.
okay,
Um, so
good.
after Lizzie hears Darcy saying this mean crap about her, he's like, the last guy she would ever be interested in because duh. Due to the lack of people to hang around with in their village, randomly Bingley's sister, like I said earlier, they invite Jane over because she's the only one they like in the whole town.
Mm-hmm.
um, and Bingley is very happy. Bingley's sisters and Mr. Darcy, they kind of like her. She's like the only one to like in the whole town. So,
Yeah, and her mother makes her walk because she knows. Yeah, and her mother makes her walk because she knows the weather is going to be bad and she ends up getting sick. Meddling mother going the extra mile.
right? Who intentionally wants their kid to be sick, especially in a time before real medicine?
Yeah, well, Jane really does get sick and she has to stay with the Bingleys for a couple weeks, is the timeline I got out of the book.
Yeah. And due to not being able to call quickly or text, today's conveniences,
Mm-hmm.
um, Lizzie ends up walking over there and stays to care for her sister. She sees Bingley's sister seem to actually care for her sister, but she just doesn't trust them. She
Mm-hmm.
does, however, definitely notice Bingley is really genuinely concerned for Jane's health.
Yeah. And after Jane recovers, Lizzie and she return home. They end up meeting a soldier named George Wickham, and Lizzie is really taken with him as he is with her. So when she sees him, they run into Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley. And it's immediately known that Darcy and Wickham do not like each other at all. And there's some real bad blood there.
I think this interaction pushes Lizzie to like Wickham even more, just to have,
Hmm.
a common enemy in Mr. Darcy. And
Yeah.
also, while Wickham is being introduced in the storyline, we meet the cousin of the Bennets, Mr. Collins, we mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
He's going to inherit their land, and Mr. and Mrs. Bennet don't like him because they're afraid he'll just kick them out. If Mr. Bennet dies, he'll kick all his daughters out and his wife, and they'll be left to the streets. But like we just described earlier, Mr. Collins is, in a proper English term, described as a dweeb. He thinks he's impressing people with himself, but really he's just making everything awkward and inserts himself into conversations. It's just annoying.
Oh, yeah, for sure. A nerd alert. He has his eyes set on marrying one of his cousins. At first, he lets it be known he's interested in Jane, but Mrs. Bennet shuts him down and lets him know she's spoken for with Mr. Bingley, and therefore he starts eyeing Lizzie right away. And once he actually proposes, Lizzie turns him down, and he pretty much says he knows she's just trying to get him to propose again, so he will wait. He doesn't listen when people talk. He's very obnoxious, but eventually he ends up marrying Lizzie's very good friend, who's pretty much a spinster, and they seem pretty happy. But I really liked his character in the movie.
Ew.
I
Ew.
mean, he played a good dweeb. He played a good like
Convincing.
he was very yeah, I mean, he was a really good actor. I don't know his name, but
Yeah. So,
Mr. Collins.
actor. So upon Jane's recovery, Mr. Bingley had actually promised to throw a ball. Well, guess who chickens out and showing up? Mr.
Who?
Wickham. That's who, of course. And I feel like this small show of cowardice is a foreshadowing of him as a person,
Mhm.
chicken. But also at this ball, Darcy asks Lizzie to dance. And what you don't
What?
do in the Regency period is say no. But Lizzie said, no, thank you.
Yeah, she was like, "You wish, jerk." I mean, I don't think I'd want to dance with a person who insults my whole family and myself.
Same. The other, big observance at this ball is that Mr. Bingley is utterly captivated by Jane, and they only have eyes for each other the whole evening.
Right? Which it makes it so confusing shortly after the ball when Jane receives a letter from Bingley's sister that they've left their rented house and returned to London, and they do not expect to ever return. So, what, Jane? She's pretty heartbroken. She's confused. I mean, she truly fell for him.
Yes, and Bingley's sister is kind of like rubbing it in, and she's so happy to be gone because she starts noticing that, Darcy actually kind of likes Lizzie and not
Hmm.
her. So she's like, we ain't ever coming back.
Yeah, but life seems to return a bit to normal, and Jane gets to go to London with an aunt and uncle for a few months, and she's really hoping to run into Mr. Bingley, but he never calls on her. And Jane goes to see his sister, and she's really sort of rude to her and shows her true colors. And um, then Jane realizes she was just trying to see the good in her and is really heartbroken after the encounter, even more.
Yeah. And while Jane is away, Lizzie goes to visit her good friend who married Mr. Collins. While visiting, she gets to dine with this aristocratic lady Mr. Collins works for, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And guess who her nephew is and who happens to be visiting?
Why, it's Mr. Darcy.
Yes, Darcy is drawn to Lizzie and keeps showing her like all of this pointed attention that has her unsettled.
Hmm.
It's so unexpected to her that he's like complimenting her and being kind, and she just gets pretty confused because while she's there, she finds out that Mr. Darcy is the one who convinced Bingley to leave and abandon her sister.
Mm-hmm.
And she just gets this migraine over it because
Mm-hmm.
how are you so conflicting? Um, but I feel you, Lizzie. Stress migraines are the worst, you
Yeah.
know. And while she's having this terrible migraine, up comes Fitzwilliam Darcy.
Yeah, and he says he had to make sure she was okay. And then he professes how he knows she's inferior in birth than him, and she has relatives that are in trade and pretty much a wild and crazy family. And despite all those factors, he wants to marry her.
So romantic.
Yeah.
Well, to Darcy's complete surprise, Lizzie rejects him and she really hands it to him. She even brings up Wickham and the evil she was told he did to him regarding his inheritance. But what she really went in on him about was that he ruined her sister's chance at happiness, that her
Hmm.
sister Jane is just shy and was actually in love with Bingley. And now Darcy ruined her chances for that future with her love. And Darcy says something to the effect, "Forgive me, madam, for taking up so much of your time."
And that's what Mock Dawsey said in Bridget Jones' Diary. And then she cried over him.
Well, Mr. Darcy waits for Lizzie like the next day in her favorite spot to go walking and hands her a note. He's like, "I'll leave you alone. I just want to give you this." So it tells you everything that really happened. And he tells her, the whole story with Wickham, that he really is manipulating everybody. Wickham had all these debts that he made Darcy pay off. And then he tried to seduce Darcy's younger sister, who he said is very young. She's like 15, and tried to get her to run away and marry him so he could inherit her money.
I mean, obviously Lizzie was completely shocked. And, she slowly realized there was no way he could be lying about that. He apologizes for how he acted and explained how he couldn't understand why she saw things from her perspective. He also wrote Lizzie that he thought her sister did not return the affections of Mr. Bingley due to how he observed Jane's reactions to Mr. Bingley. He clearly saw his friend was in love with Jane, but didn't know Jane well enough to realize shyness was her nature. And he even tells Lizzie that Bingley has no idea Jane is even in London at the same time. So that made her very relieved that it wasn't an intentional diss to Jane, that he didn't call on her, and he wasn't ignoring her.
I think it was very honorable of him to write this letter and lay it out to Lizzie. He wasn't trying to re-propose to her or even trash talk Wickham or anything. He even said he was unable to articulate these thoughts the day before in person when she denied his proposal because she deserved this type of response, very mature and I think considerate.
Yes, I agree. It was honorable of him, and that's when I really started liking him.
Hmm.
And from there, Lizzie returns to life on the farm. She goes home for a while until her aunt and uncle invite her to go on a tour of the lakes. But due to some scheduling conflict, they have to change their tour to a smaller area, an area where a Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy's house just happens to be located. Oop.
Her aunt and uncle insist they go to Darcy's estate for a tour since he's supposedly out of town. And while touring the estate, Lizzie gets more and more enchanted by Darcy and really starts having feelings since she kept going over his letter and all their interactions while, you know, just trying to absorb it all and realizing she was probably wrong about him. While outside of the house walking, who does she happen to run into?
Why, it's Mark Darcy. Oh gosh, my voice.
That
Hold
wasn't
on.
British at all.
Why, it's Mark Darcy. Just kidding, just kidding. It's Mr. Darcy.
Yes. Yes, and he's nothing but extremely kind to her uncle and aunt who are in trade in classes below him that he used in their marriage proposal. But he's so nice to them, and she can't help but notice, like, you are acting way different than you've ever been, like, did he really take what I said to heart? That's all she's thinking. And it seems like he definitely did because he was beyond kind to her aunt and uncle.
So Darcy arrives to invite Lizzie and her aunt and uncle for dinner when Lizzie receives news that Lydia has run away with Wickham to get married. But they don't head to Scotland. Instead, they go hide in London, where it seems Wickham really doesn't have the intentions to marry Lydia at all. Instead, she's pretty much just ruining her life and that of her sisters with this scandal.
Lizzie must return home where Jane has also returned, and they're all just trying to help their mother keep it together while their father's out searching for Lydia.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, after about 2 weeks, maybe longer, that's just how I read it, their father returns home and finds out Wickham agrees to a small settlement and a yearly allowance, pretty much in order to marry Lydia. Mr. Bennet can't believe that Wickham settles for such a low price to marry her because she's so obnoxious. And he figures his brother in law must have really paid a ton of money to Wickham in order to get him to marry Lydia in the first place.
Right. And so Wickham and Lydia return to the Bennet's home, and Lydia is such a little brat to all her sisters since she's the first one who's married and acts like she won a prize. Very unlikable.
After the whole drama of Lydia being an idiot, running away, who arrives back in their little town but Mr. Bingley? Hurrah! He's returned.
And one of his first stops is to see Jane. They definitely have an awkward first reunion, but he shortly thereafter proposes, and Jane and he are so happy.
In the in between, Lizzie finds out it wasn't her uncle who found Lydia at all. It was Mr. Darcy. And he's also the one who paid off Wickham to prevent ruination to Lydia and her sisters. Oh, but he never wanted her to find out. Ugh.
I just love him. I mean, what a gentleman and so selfless. A complete 180 from who he was in the beginning of this story, you know?
Yeah. And then they get together and live happily ever after. Oh.
Donna, you're giving it all away. Do you think that's a good idea? I mean, I know everyone's had 200 years to read it, but
That'll be okay. That pretty much sums up our review and kind of reenactment and
I guess.
synopsis.
Yeah,
But
I'm
what
with
did
you.
you like most about this book slash movie?
I mean, the my most favorite part was like most of the end of the movie, um, and story, but I don't want to ruin it for any ladies or gentlemen who still have yet to read it, but I mean, it was a clean romance, and there was nothing raunchy or too risque esque. I could enjoy it without feeling like I was in someone else's BDSM chamber, like many romance novels out there. But the ending was my favorite with all the romance and Lizzie and Darcy's love life. It was very precious and innocent and intense at the same time. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved the movie when I was in high school and it came out. I watched it a lot and I'm glad I finally read the book.
yeah, good job on reading the entire piece of work. I mean, that was like what, 50,000 pages?
Yeah, I think it was 75,000 pages actually, but yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, what about you? What did you like the most about the book?
I have to agree with you. I like the love story towards the end of the book because it actually started picking up the pace and it was drawn out a lot more than the movie had time to go over. And the book, it was better than the movie. I mean, of course. But I'm really a sucker for enemy to lover themes in books.
Yeah.
Um, and I just the ending, like it was so kind of him to do those things, and he really heard what she was trying to say, and he listened and like took the feedback and changed. Like, dang, that's so sweet.
Yeah. So I'm
Just
going
saying.
to go ahead and rate it. I give it 3 stars out of 5. And I know the book was way better. Okay. I should have given a different audiobook narrator a try. I did enjoy it. I truly did. It just an advanced antique foreign literacy level. And I'm not shy of a nice expansive vocabulary, but dang, I'm rusty on Old English.
Yes, it was very hard to get into the writing style. I had to put the book down at least 20 times before forcing myself to read it because I was sick. I rated a 3.5 star out of 5 due to the intricateness of the writing, and it's a classic. It's been done so many times. I mean, it works, or else the storyline wouldn't keep popping up. Um, but
Yeah.
who do you think would enjoy this book?
I think it's appropriate for girls 12 and up or boys, I guess. It's a sophisticated type of movie with plenty of wordisms and philosophical yammer jammer. I mean, I couldn't keep up with even the movie at times. I mean, but
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not user friendly in that regard. I watched the movie when I was, 16 to 17, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, a lot of the movies now are so vulgar or pushing the buttons that we're kind of numb to inappropriateness we see on television and social media. There's no boundaries. But
mhm,
I like that this was clean and you don't have to worry about your kids seeing something they shouldn't. I definitely recommend.
me too. Well, everyone, this wraps up our review of Pride and Prejudice and our first season of Ravished.
Woo, we did it!
Yay. Yes. I can't believe we did 10 whole episodes. Go Ravished.
Yeehaw! Or as my 1-year-old says, hee haw. It may not seem like a lot, but so much work has gone into these episodes, and we try to provide you all with quality reviews, and we truly hope you enjoy them. Here's to many more seasons.
And we promise we won't take too long of a hiatus, but with the holidays and other exciting events, Donna,
Yes, we're having our first podcast baby in January.
yay.
Yay. So after I adjust to having 2 kids under 2, we will be
Wow.
back.
I cannot wait for that little angel to change scenery. So, thank you all so much for tuning in. Please remember to rate, write a review, and subscribe to Ravished on your favorite podcast platform.
Also, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ravished Podcast.
Bye.
Bye.